The encounter in the rain. The rain fell softly over the ruins of the alien city, washing the dust and ash from broken walls. Ethan, a tired human traveler, walked slowly through the empty streets, his boots splashing in muddy puddles. He carried a small backpack, an old rifle on his shoulder, and memories too heavy to count. The war between humans and aliens had ended months ago, but the silence that followed felt worse than the noise of battle. Every building around him was half destroyed, windows shattered, smoke still rising from the cracks. Ethan had once been a soldier here, fighting against creatures he barely understood. Now, he was nothing, just a man searching for a reason to keep moving. The cold wind bit through his torn jacket as he looked for shelter. He wanted a place to rest, maybe a fire, maybe just peace. Then he heard it, a voice, small and trembling, cutting through the rain. "Please, human, take my teddy bear." Ethan froze. He turned around, but saw only the shadows of fallen walls and burning wires. He thought it was his mind playing tricks again, ghosts of the past whispering to him. But then the voice came again, weaker this time. "Please, take it, my little brother. He hasn't eaten in days." Ethan's eyes searched the dark street until he saw her. A tiny alien girl stood near a collapsed house, her thin arms hugging a dirty brown teddy bear. Her skin was pale blue, covered in dust, her big silver eyes filled with fear and pain. She looked no older than 8, maybe younger. Her clothes were torn, soaked from the rain, her small body shaking. The toy she held was missing an ear and one eye, yet she held it like the most precious thing in the world. Ethan took a careful step forward, his heart heavy with something he hadn't felt in years, compassion. He lowered his weapon and spoke softly. "Hey, are you hurt?" The girl stepped back, clutching the teddy bear tighter. "You're human," she whispered. "Humans kill us." Her voice cracked like the wind. Ethan sighed, his eyes filled with guilt. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "I just want to help." She didn't believe him right away. The fear in her eyes said she had seen too much. Maybe soldiers burning homes, maybe her parents falling before her. The silence between them stretched, broken only by thunder above. Finally, she took one step closer, still trembling. "My name is Lyra," she said, almost in a whisper. "My brother is sick. We don't have food." She looked down at the teddy bear, brushing its wet fur. "He cries when he's hungry, so I tell him the teddy will bring food soon." Ethan knelt slowly so he wouldn't scare her. He took off his backpack, opened it, and pulled out a small ration pack. It wasn't much, just dry bread and protein cubes. But Lyra's eyes widened as if she saw treasure. He smiled gently. "Take it." She hesitated, then ran forward and snatched it from his hand, running back to the shadows. Ethan watched her vanish into a dark alley, wondering if she'd come back. But something inside told him he couldn't leave her like that. Minutes passed. Then he saw a faint flicker of light deep inside the broken building. He followed, stepping over debris, through a cracked door, into the darkness. The smell of smoke and damp earth filled the air. The flicker was from a small fire made from scrap metal and wires. Beside it, Lyra knelt next to a tiny alien boy lying on a blanket made of old cloth. He was barely breathing, his face thin and pale. She tried to feed him the bread, but his lips wouldn't move. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Wake up, Tyne. Please." Ethan's chest tightened. He had seen soldiers die, enemies fall, but never a child starving like this. He took a deep breath and stepped closer. Lyra looked up sharply, ready to defend her brother, but Ethan only raised his hands. "I can help," he said softly. "I have medicine in my pack." She didn't move for a moment, then slowly nodded. Ethan knelt beside the boy, pulling out a small vial from his kit, an old human nutrient serum. He injected a small amount carefully, watching the boy's breathing steady. Lyra gasped, her tears mixing with rain. "You saved him." Ethan shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "He needs food and warmth." Lyra sat beside her brother, her small hands clutching the teddy bear again. "He won't sleep without it," she whispered. "It was from our mother." Ethan looked around the shelter, broken pipes, cracked floors, the sound of water dripping. It was no place for kids. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Since the soldiers came," she said, voice dull with pain. "They said they would make peace, but they burned our street." Her words hit him like a blade. He looked at his own hands, once proud to wear the uniform that did this. Now he couldn't even look at himself. Outside, thunder shook the sky. Ethan knew staying here was dangerous, but leaving them behind was worse. He stood up and said quietly, "Lyra, I'll find more food tomorrow." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and hope. "Will you come back?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I promise." Before leaving, he looked at the small teddy bear resting beside the boy. It was torn and faded, but to that little family, it was everything. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt human again. He stepped out into the rain, his heart heavy but alive. Behind him, the faint sound of Lyra humming a lullaby echoed through the ruins. Her voice, fragile and pure, carried across the dark streets like a promise. A promise that maybe, just maybe, kindness could still survive in a broken world. The hidden shelter. The morning came slow and gray, clouds still heavy from the night rain. Ethan walked through the destroyed city again, his boots crunching over glass and ash. He hadn't slept. Not really. His mind kept replaying the small face of the alien girl and her sick brother. He didn't know why he cared. Maybe because he once had a sister who died during the first strikes. Maybe because her voice reminded him of innocence the war had stolen from everyone. He tightened his jacket, looked at the empty streets, and whispered to himself, "I made a promise." And promises, to Ethan, still meant something. He searched the old human outpost ruins for supplies. Most storage pods were empty, but in a half-buried bunker, he found a dusty crate with survival packs. Inside were protein tubes, water tablets, and thermal blankets. He smiled faintly. Luck was rare in this world. He filled his bag quickly and hid the rest for later. When he reached the same street as last night, everything looked lifeless again. The broken wall where the girl had stood was silent. No light, no sound. For a moment, he feared she was gone. But then he noticed something scratched into the wet mud, small alien letters forming an arrow. He followed it carefully through narrow alleys, across collapsed bridges, deeper underground. Finally, he reached a metal door half covered in rubble. It was small, just enough for a child to slip through. He knocked twice, then waited. Nothing. Then a faint voice came from inside. "Who is it?" "It's me," Ethan said softly. "The human from last night." The door creaked open an inch, and two silver eyes peeked out. When she saw the food bag, her expression changed from fear to shock. "You came back," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. "I promised," Ethan said with a small smile. She pulled the door open wider and motioned him inside. The air was damp and cold. The smell of rust and burnt plastic filled the narrow tunnels. The walls were lined with pieces of cloth and wires for light. Ethan followed her down a slope until they reached a small underground hall. And there, he stopped, his heart tightening again. There were more children, at least 7 of them, all alien, all thin, dirty, and scared. Some were sleeping close together for warmth. Others stared at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Lyra spoke quickly. "They are my friends. They lost their parents too." Ethan looked around, realizing this was more than a hiding place. It was a small orphan camp. One little boy hid behind a broken crate, clutching a spoon like a weapon. A small girl stared at Ethan's face as if trying to read if he was a monster or a miracle. Ethan slowly opened his bag and began to hand out the food. No one moved at first, but when Lyra nodded, the children came closer. They grabbed the packets and tore them open, eating fast, afraid it might vanish. Ethan watched in silence, his throat tight. He had seen hunger before, but never like this, pure desperation. Lyra sat beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They hide here because humans burned our homes," she said. "The soldiers said they were freeing us." Her words stung. He couldn't look her in the eye. He wanted to say not all humans were like that, but he knew excuses wouldn't change their pain. After the children finished eating, Ethan took out the blankets. He wrapped one around Lyra's shoulders, another over the small sick boy, Tyan, who was now breathing better. She smiled faintly. "He looks warmer now." Ethan nodded. "Keep the fire low." He began repairing the broken vent with bits of metal and wire, sealing out the cold air. For a moment, the place actually felt like home. Then a sharp noise echoed from above, a metallic clang followed by boots. Lyra's eyes widened. "They're back," she whispered. "The patrols." Ethan grabbed his rifle instantly, turning off the firelight. "Where's the exit?" he asked. "There isn't," she said softly. "We only have this way." The children huddled together, silent, trembling. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the tunnels. He could hear muffled voices, humans, talking about searching for deserters. Ethan's pulse quickened. If they found him here, they'd kill him, and the children too. He took a deep breath, pushed a crate against the entrance, and whispered, "Stay quiet, no matter what happens." Lyra nodded, clutching her teddy bear tightly. The boots stopped right above them. A voice shouted, "Check the lower levels, heat signature detected." Ethan cursed under his breath. His bag must have given them a signal. The next seconds were chaos. He moved silently through the back tunnel, using his flashlight dimly. There was a small maintenance shaft at the far end, just big enough to crawl through. He turned to Lyra. "Take the others and stay hidden. I'll draw them away." Her eyes widened. "You'll die?" He smiled sadly. "Not today." He climbed through the shaft, emerging near a broken power hub. The rain was falling again, the smell of ozone in the air. He took his rifle and fired 2 quick shots into the air, far from the shelter, to pull their attention. The soldiers shouted and ran toward the sound. Ethan slipped behind a fallen structure, breathing hard, heart pounding. He knew he couldn't go back yet, but at least the children were safe, for now. As thunder rolled across the sky, Ethan whispered to himself, "I'm no hero." But deep down, he felt something awaken, something he thought had died long ago. The will to protect. The will to be human. Far below, in the dark shelter, Lyra held the teddy bear close and whispered a prayer. She didn't know if the human would return again, but for the first time in many nights, she believed someone might care. And hope, small and fragile, flickered in the ruins like a candle refusing to die. The food hunt. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky still carried the color of sorrow. Ethan woke up inside a burned vehicle, hidden under broken metal sheets, his body sore and his mind restless. He had escaped the patrol last night, but he knew it wouldn't be for long. They would return, searching every corner of the ruins. And the children, those fragile souls, were still trapped below the city, depending on him. He looked at his reflection in a cracked mirror. The man who stared back wasn't the soldier he once was. His beard had grown rough. His eyes carried guilt heavier than his rifle. He whispered to himself, "You can't undo the war, but maybe you can feed what's left." Ethan began his search for food, moving through the skeleton of the city. He passed wrecked hovercars, fallen drones, and old banners still waving with the symbol of the Galactic Alliance. Every street held memories of fire. He walked fast, keeping to the shadows, scanning every corner for signs of life or danger. The silence was broken only by distant thunder and the soft hum of broken energy lines. After hours of searching, he reached an old supply depot, half buried under debris. It had once belonged to the human military, his own side. He hesitated, then climbed through a cracked window. Inside, it smelled of oil, smoke, and old death. But in the corner, behind fallen crates, he found what he was looking for. A storage unit still sealed by biometric lock. Ethan smiled faintly. His old military ID chip was still in his wrist. He pressed it against the scanner, and the door clicked open with a low hiss. Inside were ration packs, canned meals, and emergency water pouches, enough for weeks. He filled his backpack fast, his hands shaking not from fear, but from relief. Finally, something good. But before he could leave, he heard voices outside. Human soldiers. "Area 4 clear," one said. "Thermal scanners still show movement in Sector 7. Ethan froze. They were still tracking him. He quietly moved behind a stack of crates, holding his breath. Through the cracked wall, he saw 2 men in gray armor, his old unit's insignia still shining. One of them laughed. "Traitors probably feeding the aliens, like a fool." The other replied coldly, "If command finds him, they'll hang him on the main gate." Ethan gritted his teeth, his pulse rising. The sound of their boots grew closer. He waited, tense as wire, and when they turned the corner, he threw a small smoke grenade from his pack. The explosion filled the depot with gray mist. He ran, silent and fast, through the other side and into the alleyways. His lungs burned as he moved, but he didn't stop until he was far enough. He reached an abandoned transport hub, crouched behind a wrecked cargo pod, and caught his breath. He looked at the bag full of food and whispered, "For them." He could have left the city, could have escaped to the mountains. But every step he took now had only one direction, back to those children. By nightfall, the city turned colder. Artificial moons glowed weakly in the sky, throwing ghostly light across broken rooftops. Ethan moved like a shadow, crossing open streets and jumping over collapsed bridges. He avoided drones, patrols, and the burning beacons that marked restricted zones. Once, a flare lit up the sky, and he ducked behind rubble, waiting for it to fade. His heart thudded in his chest, but he kept moving. Finally, he reached the small tunnel that led underground. He tapped twice on the metal door, and a familiar whisper came. "Human?" "Yeah," he said softly. "It's me." The door opened, and Lyra appeared, her face lighting up with relief. "You came back," she said, holding the teddy bear. Ethan smiled. "Told you I would." He handed her the bag, and when she opened it, the children's faces glowed with joy. They pulled out packets of food, clean water, and small glowing heat tablets. One little boy clapped his hands, shouting in his language, and the others joined in. For the first time, laughter echoed through the underground hall. It was soft, fragile, but real. Ethan sat near the fire as Lyra served the others. He watched them eat slowly this time, smiling between bites. When she came to him, offering a small packet, he shook his head. "I'm fine," he said, but she placed it in his hand anyway. "Humans get hungry too," she whispered with a shy smile. He laughed quietly, a sound he hadn't made in years. But then Lyra's expression changed. Her ears twitched, eyes darting toward the tunnel entrance. Ethan immediately stood up, rifle ready. A red light flickered through the cracks, scanning light. Someone was outside. Lyra's voice trembled. "They found us." Ethan moved to the door, peeking through the slit. Two armored soldiers stood outside, holding scanners. One of them spoke into his comm. Thermal readings confirmed, movement inside. Ethan cursed under his breath, his mind racing. He turned to Lyra. "Take the kids and hide behind the tanks now." She nodded, gathering them fast. He knew he couldn't let them enter. If they saw the children, it would be over. He grabbed a metal pipe, hit the power conduit, and sparks flew. The lights flickered and died, plunging the tunnel into darkness. He slipped out through the emergency hatch he'd spotted earlier. As he crawled into the upper ruins, rain began to fall again. The cold drops ran down his face like tears he didn't have time to shed. He looked back once, toward the shelter, and whispered, "Stay safe, little one." Then he turned toward the patrol lights in the distance. He had to lead them away again. The hunt wasn't over. But this time, it wasn't for survival. It was for hope. And in that broken city of war, hope was the rarest thing of all. The commander's threat. The night was burning red again. Searchlights sliced through the ruins like white blades, cutting across broken towers and shattered domes. Ethan crouched behind a fallen statue, watching soldiers sweep the streets below. They moved like machines, perfect lines, sharp orders, no mercy. And leading them was a face Ethan never wanted to see again. Commander Rask, his old superior. Rask had been a legend during the war, cold and fearless, the kind of man who called mercy weakness. Ethan still remembered his voice in the headset. "No survivors, soldier. Orders are orders." Now, that same voice echoed through the broken streets again. "Find him," Rask shouted. "The deserter is helping the enemy. Burn everything if you must." Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle. Every instinct told him to run, but he knew if he ran, Rask's men would find the children. The shelter was only 4 blocks away, hidden under the collapsed transport hub. If they discovered the heat signatures there, it would all be over. He breathed slowly, whispering to himself, "Think, Ethan, think." He scanned the area, broken fuel tanks, loose cables, scattered grenades, a graveyard of the war he once fought in. He remembered Rask's tactics, predictable, brutal, direct. So Ethan decided to do the one thing Rask would never expect, protect instead of destroy. He slipped through the shadows, his boots silent on the wet metal. He planted decoy flares near the opposite block and set his old wrist chip to emit a human thermal signal. Then he whispered into his comm, still tuned to the old military frequency. "Target sighted near Sector 12. The soldiers immediately turned toward the false signal. Rask's voice barked through the static. "All units, converge." Ethan watched them move away. For a moment, it worked. The street fell quiet again. He took the chance to run back toward the tunnels. But as he reached the entrance, a red laser appeared on his chest. He froze. Behind him, a familiar voice said coldly, "You always were too clever for your own good." Ethan turned slowly, and there he was, Rask, standing tall in his black armor, rain dripping from the visor. The commander lowered his rifle slightly, looking at him like a ghost from another life. "You should have stayed dead on Cal 47, Rask said, his voice flat. "Now you betray your own kind for aliens." Ethan didn't reply at first, his eyes hard. "I'm not betraying anyone," he said quietly. "I'm saving children." Rask laughed, a cold metallic sound that didn't reach his eyes. "They're not children, Ethan. They're the enemy's spawn." Ethan felt anger rise like fire in his chest. "Enemy," he said, stepping closer. "The war ended, Commander, but you're still fighting ghosts." Rask pointed his weapon at him. "The war ends when our kind stops dying because of theirs," he growled. "You were a good soldier once, a hero, and now look at you, hiding in the dirt, feeding the enemy." Ethan slowly dropped his rifle to the ground. "Maybe being human isn't about winning wars," he said softly. "Maybe it's about knowing when to stop." For a moment, the rain filled the silence between them. Then Rask sneered. "You think your kindness changes anything? When I'm done, no alien will ever remember your name." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Maybe not," he whispered, "but they'll remember I tried." Then he kicked the rifle upward with his boot, grabbing it midair and diving behind cover as Rask fired. The bullets ripped through concrete, sparks flying in every direction. The sound echoed through the ruins like thunder. Ethan rolled, aimed, and shot the weapon from Rask's hand, the metal clattering onto the ground. Rask roared, charging at him. The two men collided, fists flying, crashing against walls and debris. Ethan's body ached, but he kept fighting, not for revenge, but for every frightened child below. Rask swung hard, punching Ethan to the ground. "You can't change what you are," the commander hissed, pressing a knife to Ethan's throat. Ethan gritted his teeth, the blade cutting his skin slightly. "Maybe not," he said, "but I can change what I do." He twisted the commander's wrist, slammed his elbow, and sent the knife flying. With one heavy strike, Ethan knocked him down, gasping for breath. Both men lay there for a second, broken soldiers in a broken world. Then Rask reached for his pistol, but Ethan grabbed a metal rod and struck the ground beside him, sparks flying from the live wire. The shock wave made Rask drop the weapon, dazed and coughing. Ethan stood, bleeding, rain mixing with sweat and ash. He looked down at his former commander. "You forgot what being human means," he said, voice trembling but firm. Rask glared up at him, his pride shattered. "This isn't over," he spat. Ethan turned away, picking up his rifle. "No," he said quietly, "but for them, it's enough for tonight." He limped back toward the tunnels, every step heavy. When he entered, the children were waiting in silence. Lyra ran to him, eyes wide. "You're hurt." Ethan smiled faintly, even through the pain. "Just a scratch." She helped him sit near the fire, her small hands trembling. Tyan stirred beside her, whispering weakly, "Did you stop the bad men?" Ethan looked at him and nodded slowly. "For now." The firelight reflected in the teddy bear's glass eye. Outside, thunder rolled again, but down here, it felt warm. Safe, for the first time. Ethan leaned back against the wall, his eyelids heavy. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing. He would keep his promise. No matter how many ghosts came back for him. The battle of redemption. The storm raged over the city like an angry god, thunder rolling through hollow streets, lightning flashing across broken towers. Inside the tunnels, the fire burned low, painting soft orange light over tired faces. Ethan sat quietly, his arm wrapped in a bandage made from an old cloth, his breathing heavy but steady. Lyra sat beside him, clutching the teddy bear, her small voice breaking the silence. "Will the soldiers come again?" she asked. Ethan looked at her, his eyes dark but calm. "Yes," he said softly. "They will." He glanced around the room. Frightened eyes stared back at him. Children who had lost everything, now depending on the one man who once helped destroy their world. He had no armor, no army, no orders, only a promise. He knew Rask wouldn't stop, not after being humiliated. The commander would return with more men, more fire, and this time, he would burn everything. Ethan slowly stood up, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He picked up his rifle and whispered, "Then we prepare." Lyra blinked, confused. "Prepare how?" Ethan smiled faintly. "By surviving." He began teaching them how to stay quiet, how to hide behind metal walls, how to signal danger using light. The older ones helped patch broken tunnels and spread water over the floors to cool heat signatures. He rigged traps using broken drones, battery packs, and leftover wire. Every sound in the tunnels became sharper, every breath measured. It wasn't a fortress, but it was home, and he was going to protect it. When dawn broke, the distant roar of engines filled the air. Ethan crawled to the upper vents and saw armored transports moving through the ruins. Rask had returned, leading dozens of soldiers, their armor glowing in the red sunrise. Ethan felt his stomach twist. This wasn't a patrol anymore. It was an execution squad. He returned below and whispered to Lyra, "Keep them deep in the tunnels. No noise, no light." She nodded, her small hands gripping his sleeve. "Please come back." Ethan smiled, brushing her hair gently. "I always do." He turned away before she could see the fear in his eyes. Above ground, Rask stood beside a burning vehicle, shouting orders. "Fan out. Heat sensors on. We flush him out today." Ethan climbed the cracked stairs of an old tower, setting up a sniper position with a damaged scope. He watched them move below, a line of soldiers sweeping toward the tunnel entrance. He whispered under his breath, "You came all this way for me. Then let's finish it." He fired his first shot, hitting the drone that led the group. It exploded in a flash of blue light, scattering metal and smoke. The soldiers ducked for cover, shouting, "He's here." Ethan moved positions fast, firing again and again, not to kill, just to distract. He wanted to lead them away from the children, deeper into the maze of ruins. Rask roared through his calm, "Forward! Don't let him escape." Bullets tore through concrete as Ethan sprinted across rooftops. He jumped, rolled, fired, and vanished into the mist. Each shot echoed through the city like a heartbeat, his heartbeat. The storm grew worse, wind howling like ghosts of the fallen. When his rifle clicked empty, he threw it aside and kept moving. He reached the old power station, half collapsed, full of fuel cells. Perfect, he thought. He broke open a control panel, hot-wired the main line, and set a trap. Then he shouted into the ruins, his voice echoing. "Rask, you want me? Come get me." The commander's reply came cold and clear. "You should have stayed dead, Ethan." Moments later, Rask stepped into the open, rain pouring over his armor, rifle raised. Ethan stood in front of the generator, hands shaking but steady. The air crackled with electricity, lightning flashing through broken windows. "Still saving monsters?" Rask sneered. Ethan's voice was calm. "No, just saving what's left of me." They charged at each other, the fight raw and brutal. Punches, kicks, shouts, metal clashing with bone. Rask slammed Ethan against a pillar, his armor crushing. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted. Ethan spat blood, smiling faintly. "It already has." He grabbed Rask's arm and hit the exposed switch. The power grid screamed to life. Bright arcs of energy burst through the floor. The explosion tore through the room like a thunderclap. Ethan was thrown backward, landing hard, his ears ringing. Flames rose around the generator as Rask stumbled, armor cracked and sparking. The commander reached for his gun, but Ethan kicked it away. Rask fell to his knees, coughing. "You fool, you'll die with them." Ethan stood over him, breathing hard. "Maybe," he said softly, "but they'll live." He turned and limped away as the fire spread, the whole station collapsing behind him. The explosion lit up the night sky, the shockwave shaking the ground for miles. In the tunnels below, the children cried out in fear. Lyra held the teddy bear tight, whispering, "Please come back, human, please." When the tremors finally stopped, the world above was quiet again. Rain washed over smoldering metal. Ethan emerged from the smoke, coughing, half-burned, his clothes torn. He could barely walk, but he kept moving toward the tunnels. Every step was pain, but every step was worth it. He reached the entrance, collapsed to his knees, and smiled weakly. Lyra ran to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. You came back, she cried. He nodded slowly. Told you. I always do. He closed his eyes, resting his hand on the teddy bear she held out to him. The storm outside finally began to fade, leaving behind a calm that felt almost like peace. And in that moment, under the ruins of a broken world, a soldier who had once brought destruction had become something far greater. A protector, a savior, a human again. The last promise. The fire had died, but its ashes still glowed faintly under the dripping roof. Rainwater slid down through cracks in the ceiling, landing softly on the dusty floor like tears from the sky. Ethan sat near the entrance, his body trembling, his uniform half burnt, his hands covered with blood, not all of it his own. He had survived the explosion, somehow, but survival no longer felt like victory. Lyra knelt beside him, holding a small bowl of water. Drink, she whispered, her voice shaking. He took it, his fingers brushing hers, and smiled weakly. You did good, kid. She didn't smile back, her eyes filled with something heavier than fear. Ethan, she said quietly. Tyne, he's not waking up. The words hit him harder than any bullet. He froze, then looked past her, toward the corner of the tunnel where the little boy lay still under a blanket. The teddy bear rested on his chest, its stitched eye catching the faint light. Ethan felt the world shrink. He tried to stand, but his legs failed. He crawled to the boy and placed a hand over his small heart. No beat, only silence. Lyra sat beside her brother, tears running freely down her blue cheeks. He was waiting for you, she whispered. He said the human will bring more food. Then he slept. Her voice cracked on the last word. Ethan's throat tightened, his vision blurred. He had fought soldiers, fire, pain, but not this. Not the quiet cruelty of a small heartbeat that would never return. He removed his jacket and wrapped it around the boy's tiny body. For a moment, he just knelt there, head bowed. Then he said softly, He's safe now, Lyra. No more hunger, no more fear. She hugged the teddy bear tighter. But I wanted him to see the sunrise. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to hold his voice steady. He will. He looked toward the tunnel's end, where faint morning light glowed through the cracks. He'll see it through you. Together they carried Tyne to the surface. The sky was clearing, pale gold light stretching across the broken city. Bird-like drones flew silently above, watchers of a world learning to breathe again. They found a quiet patch of soil beside a fallen tree. Ethan dug with his bare hands, ignoring the pain, the dirt mixing with blood. When the grave was ready, Lyra placed the teddy bear beside her brother. Mom said toys have souls if you love them enough, she whispered. So he won't be alone. Ethan said nothing. He just stood there, watching the small figure disappear beneath the earth. When they finished, Lyra sat silently, tracing her brother's name on a piece of metal scrap. The wind carried her song, soft, broken, beautiful, across the ruins. Ethan listened, every note carving something into his chest. A reminder that even after war, hearts could still break. As the sun rose higher, its light caught Ethan's face. For the first time in years, he wasn't wearing the mask of a soldier. He looked older, gentler, human again. Lyra turned to him, her small voice trembling. Will you leave now? Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. No, he said simply. Not until this place becomes safe again. She blinked through tears. But the other humans? He smiled faintly. Then I'll protect you from them too. There was quiet between them, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with trust. The kind that didn't need words. Days passed slowly. Ethan repaired what he could, sealed the broken walls, and built small lights from scrap energy cells. Lyra helped gather supplies from the nearby ruins, carrying them in a small bag that once belonged to her brother. They didn't speak much, but each silence was peaceful. Every night before sleeping, she would place the teddy bear's button eye near the fire as if keeping it warm. And Ethan would whisper a silent promise to the flames. I'll keep her safe. One evening, as the horizon turned violet, Lyra asked quietly, Ethan, do you think my people and yours will ever be friends? He looked at the city skyline, where the ruins met the stars. Maybe not today, he said, but one day, when someone sees what we saw, a reason to care. She smiled softly. Then I'll tell them about the human who saved us. Ethan chuckled weakly. Just make me sound taller. She laughed, the kind of laugh that made the world feel alive again. Later that night, Ethan climbed to the surface alone. He stood where the wind was strongest, the city quiet beneath him. He looked at the stars, bright and cold, scattered across the black sky. He remembered the war, the screams, the orders, the fire. Then he thought of Lyra's small hands building hope from ruin, and of Tyen's teddy bear, the symbol of a promise kept. He whispered to the sky, "You were right, kid. The teddy did bring food, it brought me." And for the first time in forever, he let himself cry, not from guilt, but from release. The rain began again, light and calm, washing the blood from his hands. Tomorrow would come with new dangers, new choices. But tonight, Ethan had found something he thought was lost forever: peace. The new dawn. The sun rose slow over the ruins, light spilling like liquid gold through broken towers and shattered domes. The city that once echoed with gunfire now breathed in silence, a wounded world learning to heal. Ethan stood on a high ledge, watching the mist rise from the streets below, his jacket torn, his face tired, yet peaceful. For the first time, he didn't feel like a soldier or a fugitive. He felt like something new, a guardian. Below him, the tunnels had changed. The cold, dark shelters had become small homes. Children laughed softly as they carried buckets of clean water. They planted small glowing seeds, alien crops, in cracked soil that still remembered fire. Lyra ran between them, her hair tied with a piece of old human cloth, her laughter echoing like music. Ethan climbed down slowly, his knees weak but his heart strong. Lyra looked up and waved. "Morning, human." He smiled. "Morning, commander." She giggled, pretending to salute. "The rations are ready." He followed her inside, where the smell of cooked roots filled the air, real food, grown by small hands. Hope had roots now. Hope was alive. A small memorial stood near the tunnel entrance, a mound of stones with a tiny teddy bear sitting on top. Every morning, the children placed a flower beside it. No one spoke during that time, but everyone felt the same warmth in their chest. The teddy had become their symbol, not of sorrow, but of survival. Of the day a human chose compassion over orders. Weeks passed, and the world above began to change too. Drones that once hunted now hovered silently, scanning the ground but not firing. Someone, somewhere, had noticed that the war was ending not through weapons, but through kindness. Rumors spread, whispers of a human living among alien children, protecting them, teaching them. Some called him a traitor. Others called him the first real soldier of peace. One afternoon, as Lyra was gathering herbs near the ruins, she froze. Figures were approaching, humans, armed, wearing the same armor Ethan once wore. She ran to warn him. "They're coming." Ethan stood quietly, looking toward the horizon. He didn't reach for his weapon. He only said, "Then let's welcome them." When the soldiers arrived, they stopped at the edge of the clearing. Their leader stepped forward, a young captain, barely older than Ethan had been when the war started. He looked around, seeing the children, the gardens, the quiet peace. Then his gaze met Ethan's. "I was told we'd find a deserter here," he said carefully. Ethan nodded. "You did." The captain lowered his weapon slowly. "These are the aliens?" he asked, glancing at the small faces watching from behind the rocks. Ethan smiled softly. "No, these are just children." Silence stretched, long and heavy. Then the captain took off his helmet and looked at the teddy bear shrine. He exhaled deeply. "I have a sister back home," he said quietly. "She's the same age." Something shifted then, subtle but powerful. The soldiers began to lower their rifles one by one. No one gave an order. They just did. It was as if the world itself was tired of hate. One of them approached Lyra and handed her a canister of clean water. She blinked in surprise, then smiled, whispering, "Thank you." Ethan felt something rise in his chest, pride, relief, maybe even faith. He looked at the captain, who said quietly, "We'll report this place as uninhabited." Ethan nodded. "Good." For the first time, the two sides didn't need words of war. They just understood. As the soldiers left, Lyra stood beside Ethan, holding his hand. "Did we win?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her and smiled. "No," he said, "we started." That evening, the children gathered near the fire. Ethan sat among them, telling stories of the old stars, of planets where snow fell like diamonds. Lyra leaned against his shoulder, her eyes half closed. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and full of peace. "You know," she whispered, "Mom said every good thing starts with something small." Ethan nodded, looking at the teddy bear glowing in the firelight. "Yeah," he said, "sometimes it starts with a toy." The wind outside carried the sound of laughter through the ruins. Not the laughter of victory, but of healing. The city that once burned now shone with tiny lights made from broken drone cores, like new stars being born from the dust. From the top of the hill, it looked as if the world was alive again. And as dawn touched the sky once more, a single thought echoed through the silence. A thought that belonged to both humans and aliens alike. Being human was never about blood, or shape, or world. It was about the choice to care, even when no one else would.